Last year, in August, I preached about the story of a Kenyan man named Charles Mully. It's a rags to riches story, but it's more than that. It's a story of rags to riches to true riches. Treasure in heaven, if you will. Charles Mully was abandoned by his family as a boy and spent most of his youth begging for food. When an Indian family eventually took him in and gave him work, he quickly found new ways to be industrious and innovative. Within just a few years, he owned a fleet of taxis, then a welding company, then a tire company. And soon he was the primary distributor of oil and gas in all of Kenya. In less than a decade, he had gone from literal rags to literal riches. He was a multimillionaire, and his family of 10 was living the dream. But then Mully had an encounter with a band of street boys, which, to make a long story short, turned him upside down and changed his entire outlook on the purpose of his life and the purpose of his wealth. So the next day, he began selling all his businesses, liquidating everything, and offering a home to as many abandoned children as he could find. Eventually, this grew from a handful of children to 100 and more, so the family was forced to move out of their home to a place where there was room for all of them. And as the money began to run out, Mully dreamed of a day when the family would be self-sufficient, not relying on the government or on the whims of charitable organizations, however well-meaning. But this new place of theirs was a desert. There was no agriculture, no trees, there was no water. And what little water they did have was contaminated. So these kids, hundreds of kids, they were getting sick, contracting typhoid, and some were even dying. And the documentary of their story, simply titled Mully, which is free on YouTube, by the way. His oldest daughter recounts the story about their water problem. She says, "I remember Dad and Mom praying about it, and Dad crying, praying and begging for water. Then one night he woke up. He woke Mom up, and they went outside, and they walked from the house. And he felt a voice telling him to walk up straight and turn. And that's the place where the water would come. They prayed some more, and they felt, yes, this is the place that they needed to dig. So the work started the next day." This is still his daughter talking. "It was hard to believe him, very hard. Most of the workers did not believe and refused to be part of it. My brother Dixon and Isaac, they dug for the water." End quote. One of his sons added, "Now this is after trying to dig a couple of well holes with machines going down a couple 100 feet to get water, and we still have no water. And my father says we need to grab a few shovels and start digging by hand. That is total craziness. Most of us, not believing, we dug for a couple of days, and we dug, and we got to this hard rock, this volcanic rock. And we called my dad and said, 'Dad, we dug your vision, and this is where it's taken us. We have rock, but we have no water. So what should we do?' My dad says, 'We were shown water here. So keep digging.' So it was my brother's turn to dig, and He took out this pickaxe and just hit on the rock. And he hit on it again. And all of a sudden, water just came out. End quote. The family goes on to tell about the commotion that resulted, children from all over rushing to the hole, shouting, "Maji, Maji, water, water," as it gushed up from the ground. And his daughter continued the story by saying that after that, we had water in the land in an area that is not known to have any well. There were no wells in this land. It is unheard of. Not only did they have a well, they had so much water that within a year, the entire property was transformed from a desert into a farm, feeding their enormous family, but also giving them a trade, a product to sell to the public, and even to export as far as Europe. With water available, they also started planting trees, over 1 million of them. The result of all this new vegetation is that clouds begin to form where there never were clouds before. And there's rainfall where there was none before. Just like James writes in our epistle today, Mully was patient, strengthening his heart and believing that God would send the promised rain. And now, just as Charles Mully had dreamed, the family was self-sustaining. Not only that, they had effectively created a microclimate with regular rainfall and agriculture in a previously dry and barren land. Not because of their ingenuity or because of luck or because of their business acumen, but because of their faith. Digging and digging against all reason, believing against all odds. The lives of 18,000 children and counting have been changed forever because Charles Mully believed that the wilderness and the dry land shall be glad, and the desert shall, in fact, rejoice and blossom. Every reading we've heard this morning pushes us into these divine reversals. In the words of Isaiah, strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. For waters shall break forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. Do you hear the reversal? In the words of Mary, God has cast down the mighty and lifted up the lowly. God has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. Do you hear the reversal? And in the words of her son Jesus, the blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor have good news brought to them. Do you hear the reversal? Forget everything you know about everything. Something new is here, and everything is turned upside down. You know, growing up Pentecostal, I never heard the word Advent until I was an adult, when a group of evangelical church planters and emerging church types started a movement called Advent Conspiracy. In their own words, Advent Conspiracy was founded on the radical idea that we can celebrate Christmas humbly, beautifully, and generously. Advent is the story of a wondrous moment when God entered our world to make things right. It is the greatest story ever told, and it changes everything, including the way we celebrate Christmas. Now, one of their central tenets is to free ourselves from our addiction to consumerism, especially at Christmas time, and dedicate ourselves to meeting the needs of others instead. Now, at that time, the movement was committed specifically to providing clean water for people who had no access to it, especially in places like Kenya. So really, before I knew anything about the 4 weeks of Advent or the liturgy or the lectionary or the color of the candles, Advent to me was water in the wilderness. It was giving instead of getting. It was joy in the midst of chaos and peace in the midst of stress. So I'd like us to take a moment now before I conclude to reflect on what the Advent and Christmas season actually means to us, to you, in your real life, in your daily life. Now, on the face of it, we are blessed to enjoy a beautiful, hopeful season of celebration and cherished traditions. But for some, this is also a time for bad memories to resurface, or a time when relatives make our lives difficult, or a time when finances are stretched to the breaking point. For most, it's a mixture of blessing and adversity. Now, whatever it is, and whatever challenge we face, I know that we can choose to be a blessing. We can think harder about the money we spend this season and perhaps donate to the work of Charles Mully at mullychildrensfamily.org, or to providing clean water to those who don't have it at the website water.cc. We can let go of our attachments, and we can choose to bring peace and joy into the lives of those around us, and to be part of God's healing of a broken world. Sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf, food to the hungry, and humility to the powerful. There is no better time than Advent to remember that we are a part of the story of Jesus, Emmanuel, God with us, and us with them, and all of us together to do the work that we can do. And when we've done all we can, to turn to God and pray for rain. Amen.